well, I know what a Roadrunner is going to do. I don't know what the heck a H7 is going to do. Okay, but if you're a new player to disc golf, you don't know what the hell a Roadrunner is. One of the things that holds people back from throwing Prodigy discs the most seems to be their naming system. The D series, the A series, the PA series, the M series, the MX series, the H series, the HV2 series, the F series, the FX series. I know it can seem overwhelming, but I promise you, it's actually pretty simple, and in my opinion, it's actually one of the best naming systems in the game. And once you know it, I think it's actually hard to forget. So in today's video, I'm going to be breaking down the entire Prodigy discs naming system. I have almost every mold that Prodigy currently produces, and we're going to take you through all of it.
There's 3 keys to disc golf: driving, approaching, and putting. You need all 3 to do this disc sport.
First things first, the putters, the PA1. Now with the Prodigy naming system, the 1 is usually going to be most overstable, and then as you get lower down the list, the higher the number, the least stable that disc is going to be. PA1, overstable putter, okay? These things are pretty beefy, especially in the fractal plastic. The PA1 and the PA2, now they feel pretty similar. This is going to have a little bit more of a bevel, but the PA2 is going to be a very true flying, relatively straight disc. It's actually almost like an identical flyer in a way to the PA3, which is going to be next down in the lineup. But the PA3 is the first Prodigy putter that incorporates a bead. The PA3, one of the most famous Prodigy putters, one of the most famous putters in disc golf for good reason. The PA2 and the PA3, similar flight characteristics, but obviously beaded, beadless. Which brings us to the PA4, which honestly might be Prodigy's least popular putter. And I kind of think it's a little bit overlooked. The PA4 is an interesting one because of the shape of the rim. It's a very unique molding style. There's only one other disc out there on the market that's kind of like it. That's the Gateway Magic. But the PA4 is going to be next in that understability. It's a dead straight, relatively understable putter. And then that brings us to the PA5. The PA5 is going to be similar in flight characteristic to the PA4, but it's going to be added glide, added speed, and just a different hand feel altogether. That's pretty much the putters. Next, we got the A series, okay? Now, this is the series of discs from Prodigy that people probably have the most knowledge on, and I actually did a full video breakdown of these already. There's also full breakdowns that will be coming this month of all of these discs, so make sure to go check those out between every series. But the A series is available. I'll link it up in the corner. You can go check it out now. So we'll run through these real quick. If you want a little bit more information, go check out that video. A1, super beefy with a bead. A2, super beefy, beadless. Very similar disc. One's got a bead, one's beadless. Then we got the A3 and the A4. Now, the A3 and the A4 are very unique in their molding. They're similar to the hand feel of a Gator, but they're going to be a little lower profile, a little bit smaller diameter. The A3 is going to be nice and overstable, good overstability to it, and the A4 is going to be a lot pushier, a lot straighter out of the box. But if you like the hand feel of one of these, the odds are you're going to want both because you're going to be able to cover multiple slots with a similar hand feel. That brings us to the A5, which is kind of the later addition to the Prodigy A series lineup, and it's also one of the crowd favorites as a zone clone disc. Every company nowadays kind of has their zone clone disc. The A5 is that for Prodigy. Depending on the one you get, once again, it's going to be a very similar stability to an A3. All depending on the hand feel you enjoy. Do you want it beaded, or do you want that zone traditional feeling disc? That'll kind of make up your mind on which one you're looking to get. Let's move on to the mid-rangers, guys. First things first, we got the M1. Okay, the M1 is going to be the Prodigy mid-range. This is what Isaac Robinson threw like every single mid-range shot he threw when he was on Team Prodigy. It's kind of your trustworthy, straight, nice stable finish, and it's going to have a little bit more of that traditional mid-range feel to it, beveled out edge, you know, stable, but it's a nice, like, consistent flyer. Then that brings you to the M2, which the M2 and the M1, I'll be completely honest, they're a little bit of an overlap maybe in the stability category. Depending on which one you get, they're gonna, you know, you might get an M2 that's more overstable than your M1. But overall, they're a very similar hand feel. Honestly, the discs are like very close in profile, but the M2 is going to have a little bit more of a rounded edge here. But overall stabilities, they're going to be somewhat similar. That's going to bring us to the Archive, which is not part of Prodigy's original M series. And now this is another area where people get a little bit confused. They're like, okay, obviously you have the M series, you know, 1 through 4, but then you got the Archive, you got the Strider, like where do those fall? Well, the Archive is probably going to fall into a similar stability as the M1 and the M2, but with a completely different hand feel, a little more traditional to like the Buzz feeling disc, which will bring us to the next disc, which is going to be the M3. Now, the M3, in my opinion, and this is just me being transparent to you, is less stable than the M4. Now, I don't know if these two that I just happen to have are very understable. We all know from every company, you can buy a disc and it might not fly how the flight numbers say it's gonna fly. And with these M3s, that happens to be the case. I would honestly call the M3 in stability a little backwards with the M4, but just so you know, if you're going to be trying one out, I'm not quite sure what to tell you on the M3. That's just my experience. Now, the M4 is this true mid-range. You know, the Mako 3, the Buzz SS, the dead straight, super straight mid-range out of the M4. It's going to be the most neutral feeling rounded edge mid-range in the Prodigy lineup. One of my favorites, and just a very good straight flying mid-range. But that brings us to the Strider. So the Strider, based on the flight numbers, is supposed to be a little bit more overstable. Now, this one specifically flew honestly pretty similar to an M4, but I've heard if you get them in 500 plastic, which is the opaque plastic, it's going to be a little bit more overstable and maybe be a little more similar to something between the Archive and the M4. That brings us to kind of the last bit of the Prodigy mid-range lineup. Now, I am missing the MX3, but the MX3 is going to be a similar hand feel to the M1, but it's going to have a slight added bead on the rim. It's also going to be a similar flight to the M1 or the M2, where it's going to be dead straight, a little bit of nice stability at the end. But then the MX2 and the MX1 kind of break the mold, where the MX2 is a beadless, overstable mid-range, much like, you know, any of your traditional overstable mid-ranges. The MX2's closest counterpart, I would say, is going to be like a Cayman, but it's maybe a little bit smaller diameter. Then you got the MX1, which is going to be like your Justice style disc, pretty overstable. The MX1 is the most overstable you're going to get out of the Prodigy mid-range lineup. Let's move on to the F series from Prodigy, which in my mind might be the least popular series from Prodigy. So your F1 is going to be your traditional T-Bird, Eagle style fairway driver. Same thing with this is F1, most stable, all the way down to 9 is going to be the least stable. You got the F2. The only way to describe this would be kind of like your beat up Eagle or T-Bird, but straight out of the box. Maybe something similar to like a cicada type flight. The F3 is going to be similar in hand feel, which is something I really enjoy, is that the F1 through 3, they all are very similar feeling discs, but you're going to get a notch of stability through each of them. Maybe like a leopard flight out of an F3. And then you kind of get into the little bit more flippy stuff here. We got the F5, which this is going to be a lower arm speed. The F5 for a low arm speed is maybe the F1 for, you know, an above average or just, you know, moderate, solid arm speed, I guess I'll put it that way. The F7, good flippy fairway driver, okay? This is kind of a disc that is going to guarantee to go right, but it's also it's gonna fly pretty nice for you. And then that brings us all the way down to the F9. The F9 is flippy, okay? The F9 is like, hey, my mom wants to come disc golfing with me and I need a disc for her, or like your girlfriend maybe for the first time. That's what you're gonna be throwing. That's what the F9 is for, okay, guys? It's like a Roadrunner SS is the way that I would put it. Now, these next two categories are where maybe people get a little bit confused. The FX series mixed in with a couple, we'll call them player series discs, all the way up to the H series, okay? Now, these are gonna be discs anywhere from basically 9 to 11 speeds. Once again, we'll start with the most overstable. We got the FX2. So the FX2 is kind of your PD, your your stable Thunderbird type of disc. This is what a lot of the pros are going to be crushing on to have that consistent overstability. We have the feedback, which is a Kevin Jones Player Series disc in the past, which is going to fall probably right between the FX2 and the FX3. Now here's the difference in my mind is that the feedback is one of Prodigy's best feeling forehand fairway drivers, control drivers. It's a little flatter, a little more traditional molding on this one in my opinion, and that's what the feedback is kind of going to get you in terms of stability. The FX3. Now, I've had some comments recently about people really enjoying the FX3, saying it's like their beat up Firebird. I don't see that just looking at the rim and the molding of this disc, but just moves up the line in the stability category. Here we got the Shadowfax and the FX4. Now in my mind, these are very similar flight characteristic disc, but they're just a slightly different mold. And I think really what it's going to come down to between these two is a little bit of a hand feel. What hand feel do you feel better with? And kind of just go with that one. I think they're going to be very comparable, and you just got to figure out what one you like better. But that's kind of how those control drivers are going to line up in terms of stability. And then the H series, which I think this one might be one of the categories that confuses people the most, because in the past the H series was just the H series. Now it's kind of like the HV series, the version 2 series. So first things first, we got the H1 V2. Now this is going to be overstable, very like sharp feeling disc, and I don't know if it's necessarily that Firebird category. A lot of Prodigy players, I think in the past, would throw the regular H1 as kind of that nice beefy control driver. But the H1 V2 is going to be overstable, okay? And then we got the H3 V2 here, which is going to be kind of like a flippy Wraith, maybe a trail for a lot of people. Kind of that hyzer flip to flat, do whatever you want with it, control driver, very, very solid disc in Prodigy's lineup right here. Then you got the H4 V2. Now the H4 V2, very similar hand feel to the H3 V2, but it's going to be a notch more understable, being the H4 V2. I've been throwing some rollers with the H4 V2. I like it for that a lot. Maybe similar to like a Sidewinder or Roadrunner, you know, a slightly different hand feel, because if you're familiar with the H series from Prodigy, you know they're a very neutral molding. I like to explain it as the tops and the bottoms almost feel the same, which in my mind is pretty unique. And then that brings us to the H7. Okay, the H7 is going to be like your Roadrunner, okay? Very similar hand feel to a Roadrunner, where it's very rounded on both the top and the bottom. It's going to be understable. You know, a slow arm speed's dream. That's what's going to get you out of the H7. And with Prodigy's lineup, they have quite a few discs that have been out of production over the years. So obviously we're missing some gaps here in terms of discs that might be readily available, but are currently not being produced by Prodigy throughout the H series. And then last but not least, the D series. Now, I actually think this is maybe the easiest one to line up. You got the D1, which is gonna be kind of like your PD2, your destroyer. Very simply put, it's your overstable distance driver. The Reverb, which is a disc that is currently going out of production, is gonna be another one that kind of falls right between maybe the D1, right alongside the D1, maybe the D2. I think we all know with distance drivers from every company, you never quite know what you're going to get through stabilities. So I think D Model OS, Reverb, D1, and then into the D2, you're playing with stabilities here. You got to find the ones that you like, but the D2 traditionally is going to be a little less stable than the D1, but it's still going to be kind of that destroyer-esque disc, that bomber 12 speed, 13 speed, depending on the one you get, weirdly enough, okay? D3, Luke Humphreys loves these, and the D3 oftentimes is going to be a little bit more understable of an option of a distance driver, but still hold up pretty well, even for some pro arm speeds. They're still going to be throwing the D3. The D4, now that disc is going to be pretty flippy. In a tailwind, you might get a nice bomb out of it. It's a good roller disc in my experience. Very flippy, maybe similar to something like a turn. You know, that guaranteed flip distance driver. D3, maybe something like a Shrike, I'd say. Distance drivers, honestly, I feel like are pretty simple from Prodigy. I think they go all the way. I think they have the D6 as well, but I don't have one. And as the way things go, the D6, you gotta assume, is very flippy, guys. The quickest I could do with a breakdown of the Prodigy lineup naming system, I'll be honest, I think it's pretty simple, but I can see maybe if you're new, you don't know what any of them mean. But I also see the argument of like, people are like, well, I know what a Roadrunner's gonna do, I don't know what the heck a H7's gonna do. Okay, but if you're a new player to disc golf, you don't know what the hell a Roadrunner is. So there's really no difference. I think people just neglected to learn the naming system, but most players know the Discraft naming system. They know the Innova naming system. So in their mind, that's easy. But yeah, a new player who's never played disc golf, H7 and Roadrunner both mean nothing to them. You know what I mean? Anyways, guys, that is going to do it for this one. I hope that broke down everything. If I'm missing anything, I'm sure people are going to correct me down in the comments. Let me know any other questions you guys have, and I'll be sure to answer them throughout this 30-day series. If you're not all caught up, go check them out. I'll link them on the end card. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next one.
Creator of Frisbee Club, motherfuckers.
The man, the myth.
And right here, I have a frisbee bag. It holds all my frisbees, the ones I like.